Well, welcome to our last talk. Okay, and this is to present Carmen Curcó, professor of this university.
Well, yes, I've changed the title like 100 times in the past half an hour, so... well, first I want to thank Mario for inviting me to this workshop, even though he knew that talking about philosophical aspects of modality was practically impossible for me. All I will have to say about modality are some initial thoughts that come from a joint work with some colleagues and some students, and these are only initial thoughts. So, well, that's it. So I think the title now is that. Let's see within 20 minutes what it ends up. So, well, the beginning of what we are trying to find out starts with a very simple question. What is the meaning of a word like 7 or 10 or 100? Any word that in a linguistic system is devised to pick out cardinal number concepts, which such as 3 or 7, right? And the naive view, the quick answer is, well, these words, 7, 100, 3, are just elements of a linguistic system that pick out concepts in our minds, number concepts, and we have other symbols to do that do the same job as the word 7 in a language does. So we have the Arabic numerals, we have Roman numerals, Chinese things, Egyptian and Mayan representations. And the idea would be that what you have in your mind is the concept 7, and then you have different ways of addressing that concept in your memory. One of them would be the word 7. But this cannot be right. And I was always very surprised that the person who had this insight was not a linguist, not a philosopher of language, not a psychologist, but a historian of mathematics. And there's this quotation which I think makes it very clear that number signs are not the same as number words. Number words have some additional requirements. They belong in a language system. They have to conform to the grammatical rules of that system, which is something that number signs do not need to fulfill. So the quotation is this: man differs from other animals most strikingly in his language, the development of which was essential to the rise of abstract mathematical thinking. Yet words expressing numerical ideas were slow in arising, evolutionary. Number signs probably preceded number words, for it is easier to cut notches in a stick than to establish a well-modulated phrase to identify a number. And the question is, what is that well-modulated phrase to identify a number? What constraints do we need to have for a word in a language that can identify a number? And there are several facts about the behavior of number terms in a natural language that need to be explained. One of them, the most obvious, is that if this idea were right, the idea that you have language, external language and an internal language where number concepts are hosted, and then you use elements of an external language to pick them out, then you would expect that number terms in any natural language would only have an exact punctual interpretation, exactly n. And this is indeed the case for some utterances of type sentences like this. These are the 5 books I read while I was ill, can only be understood as these are the exactly 5 books I read while I was ill. And you cannot continue that sentence with, these are the 5 books I read while I was ill, if not more, if not less. That is not something you would expect in a natural language. And the reasons for that have to do with the linguistic structure where the number term appears, but in some other cases, you do have chances for ambiguity. You don't have it in cases like this, where you've got a definition, a pentagon has 5 sides, if not more, if not less, is not acceptable. No animal has 5 legs. Of course, we have a negation there. If not more, if not less, is not acceptable. The dances were 5 girls, if not more, if not less, is also not acceptable. Whereas if you had something like 5 girls danced, if not more, if not less, then you could have what we call interval interpretations. So in some cases, you can't have interval interpretations. In others, they are allowed. So for instance, for lower bounded interpretations equivalent to at least n, these are some examples. You need to have 25 right answers to pass. That can be understood as exactly 25 or more. But you wouldn't say you need to have 25 or less right answers to pass. That's not... And you can say, well, here, something else is going on. It's not just the linguistic construction. It's not just the grammar of the language which is constraining the interpretation. It's also our knowledge of the world. We know that if you have a lower bound for marks in an exam in order to pass. And this is knowledge of the world, this is not linguistic. But still you have some modals there. You need to, again, in England you must be 18 to drink legally. Again, you have a modal verb. And in that case, the interval interpretation is possible. And this one is true as well, just as in Spain, in Franco's times, if you had 12 or more kids, you were recognized as an honor, large family, condecorated, and received by him at the birth.
Does the star mean false or ungrammatical?
Ungrammatical.
Okay, just...
And not necessarily ungrammatical, but pragmatically odd. It's not something you would say. But it is just, yeah. So these are examples of at least, and you also have examples where number terms can perhaps be ambiguous, or it's the interpretation and not the number term, but you have readings where the number term has an upper bounded interpretation. And again, we have modality. You can have 2,000 calories daily with this diet, and what you cannot have now is or more. Right? You don't have lower bounded interpretations. She must cut her paper down to 15 pages. You may fail 3 times or less, but not or more. So these are some of the facts that need to be explained, and we've already seen that explanations are not going to be easy because in some cases you have linguistic structures restricting, constraining the interpretations. In other cases, it seems more a result of our knowledge of the world than anything else. And so there have been a number of views in the past 40 years about what exactly we should take the semantics of number terms to be in a natural language. What is the input that pragmatic systems will receive from finding a word that points to a number? So the naive view again is n, a word n linguistically means exactly n, and that's it. And that is the dominant view nowadays. It's called the naive view, not in any despiteful sense, just what we would all think happens. But even if it's what corresponds to our common sense, it was not the dominant position until a few years ago, 10 years ago perhaps, maybe less. And what was dominant was what is called in the literature the neo-Gricean view. Horn has this idea back in 1972 that the linguistic meaning of the word n is at least n and possibly more, just as is the case for other scalar quantifiers, such as when you have some and possibly all. So that allowed him to construct a set of linguistic scales with a similar explanation as to the meaning, the semantic meaning, and the pragmatic interpretation of all of them, and it looked very nice. But unfortunately, all the evidence fell upon it, against it. So there are thousands of arguments against this view, both theoretical, and there are thousands of, not thousands, but many experiments, many psycholinguistic experiments that show that number terms just do not behave as scalar terms like some, all. And I'm not going to go through those but just to give you that general picture. Now, there was a third position held, I think it's held by, oh, well, the Neo-Gricean view is still held by Levinson, and no one else, I think. And there was, in the 90s, early 2000s, there was a contextualist view that it was Robin Karsten and David Atlas who proposed this, that in fact what you have with a number term in natural language is a hidden variable that needs to be filled out in context with 3 values, at least, at most, or exactly. And so the idea is that the semantics of a number term is underdetermined in natural languages, and that this happens with not with Gricean processes, but with what is called primary pragmatic processes. It's just a saturation of a variable, but still it's pragmatic. I don't think, she hasn't said anything else on numbers since then, but given her view on word meaning and concept expressed, I don't think that Robin Karsten would still hold this view, but David Atlas still is holding this view. So something we've been working on is trying to test the predictions of the contextualist view against the predictions of the naive view, mainly because all the evidence is against the Neo-Gricean view. And what you find in the literature is that every time that someone proves that the Neo-Gricean view is wrong, then immediately it is as if the only other alternative were the naive view. While this is held by few people, it's still on the market, and at least methodologically, you need to discard it. So even Horn took his view back in 1996. And I've come to think more recently that rather than thinking of the semantic content of a number term, we should think of the concepts that number term enables you to evoke with its use. So I think that what is happening, but we have to develop this, is that the use of a number term, n, directs to a conceptual zone around the concept of the cardinal n in something like the language of thought. And that would be exactly n. But then we have to account for what happens when you have these other interpretations. And this is the view that Noel Burton Roberts has in a paper back in 2007, where he's not discussing number terms, but modes of representation. And just like in passing, well, he has like half a page for number terms, and he has this view, and I think he's probably right. So the idea I have is that, in fact, what happens with the word 7 is that what you can say about the content of the word 7 is that it is conventionally used to express all those concepts that have exactly 7 in their composition. So that would give you the 3 interpretations that number terms seem to have in the literature, and all of them contain exactly 7 in their composition. So what we need now is an account of what happens, what leads people to this sort of, not conceptual, but meaning adjustment or meaning modulation, what enables certain readings, what blocks those readings, what part do should be explained by syntax and compositional semantics, and what elements should be explained pragmatically. Okay, so I just want to concentrate on well, as I mentioned before, most of the readings or interval readings that you get are cases where you have a number term under the scope of a modal verb. And so the natural question is there something about modal verbs that makes this meaning flexible and allows you to search in a conceptual vicinity of the numeral, of the cardinal? And there are a set of striking facts in the literature that haven't been paid much attention, but that create a puzzle. In a paper written in 2004, Mussolini, who was running experiments with children aged between 4 years of age and below 6. He was testing their interpretations of number terms, and he found that American children around the age of 5 display some implicit knowledge that number terms can have interval interpretations. So in some cases, in many cases, in fact, children do interpret the number term as meaning at least n or at most n, but they don't know the meaning of the corresponding expressions at least and at most. And this was tested independently. So he knows that they don't know the meaning of these expressions, and still when they find bare numerals, they give these interpretations. But when number terms are modified by at least or at most, then children don't want to interpret those as interval concepts, but they insist on the punctual interpretation. And this seems contradictory at first, but it's not, because if you say, give me grog 2 cookies, if the child does not know what grog is, he will stick to what he knows, which is, or should be, if we write that 2 is used to refer to concepts that have exactly 2 in their composition. So this is all the child has, and this is the interpretation he will stick to. But, well, this is one of the findings of Mussolini, sorry. So children are much more prone to derive non-exact readings of number terms when they are not overtly modified by expressions such as at least and at most. And it seems easier for them to give non-exact readings when these are conveyed implicitly. So the question is, what is happening? So what guides children to acquire the knowledge that number terms can be used in language to convey both exact and interval readings? And what sort of evidence would make this knowledge available? So what Mussolini did was to think that utterances of number terms that give rise to non-exact interpretations typically occur in the scope of a model, such as need, may, can. And then you can think, well, this sort of utterances are pervade the interactions children have with their parents. You may have 2 chocolates, but no more. You have to eat 2 pieces of broccoli before you go out and play. And then perhaps children get evidence from this sort of language. So we went to look for data in a corpus of child language, which is called Childs. And he looked for modal utterances where the number term 2 appeared. And he found that less than 1% of the uses of 2 were embedded in the scope of a modal in parent-child talk. So this is a typical case of lack of explicit evidence, where children do not seem to be getting the evidence, the positive evidence they need to acquire certain knowledge. And so this is, again, the explicit numbers. He looked for 2. We suppose that if he had looked for 3, 4, 5, something similar would have happened. And he found around 600 uses of the number 2 in 88 pairs of parents and children between the ages of 4 and 5-11, which is the age of their children in their experiments. And he found that very few occurrences of 2 were under the scope of a model. So we have a puzzle. We know that by age 5, children typically do not know the meaning of at least and at most, at least the children he studied. But they know that number terms can have interval readings. And these children are reluctant to interpret number terms in non-exact ways in the presence of explicit superlative modifiers. Their linguistic input of number terms embedded in modals, which is typical for non-punctual interpretations, is very, very scarce. So how can they steal non-punctual interpretations when these are not explicitly signaled? Well, I think that there is an insight in the work of Bart Gertz and Nowen, who were working on something different. They were trying to prove that superlative modifiers are not equivalent to their comparative counterparts. So at least n is not the same as more than n, and at most n is not the same as at least n. And the reason they say is superlative modifiers, but now we're talking of explicit superlative modifiers, have an element of modality in their lexical entries that comparatives do not have. That's why it's... according to Gertz and Nowen, when you say something like at least 3 bombs exploded, you are asserting 2 things. First, you are asserting that it is certain that there was a group of 3 bombs that went off, and that it is possible that more than 4 bombs went off. When you modify the numeral with at most, you would be saying that it is possible that there was a group of 3 bombs that went off, and that it is not possible that more than 4 bombs went off. So if we represent the 3 interpretations of 3 that 3 can have in there, the variables here represent sets. What a child who understands interval interpretations such as at least 3 and at most 3 has to do is he has to supply what is in black and also the modal elements in here. Now, it doesn't seem to be modality itself. If you have something like you can bring 2 friends to the party, you can have the 3 interpretations. You can bring exactly 2 friends to the party. You can bring at least 2 friends to the party, or you can bring at most 2 friends to the party. So if you embed those in different contexts, someone says, look, I'm having this party, it's a disaster, please come, and when you come, do something to make this less horrible. Please do something. I know you can bring 2 friends to the party. Now, if someone understands this the way it is intended in this context, you have to attribute to the speaker the idea that the more people, or you know this from your knowledge of the world, that the more people get to the party, the more chances to find it's the spirited and dull state you will have, and that will make this part of the interpretation highly accessible. That would give you the lower bounded interpretation. Whereas in other contexts, where someone wants to bring his friends to the party, but there is limited food, limited drink, and he says, hey, can I bring some more people to your party? And the answer is, it would be nice to have some more people around at the party, but if we want drink and food to be enough for everyone, you can bring 2 friends to the party. Now, in that case, you have another assumption. You operate under the assumption that the more people in the party, the less likely food and drink will be enough for all. And that makes this part of the interval interpretation much more accessible, and that would promote an upper bounded interpretation. So what perhaps these children might be doing is, although they don't know the equivalent of phrases like at least and at most, they can ascribe this sort of interval, and this would have to be tested, but they can do this, and they can acquire this type of implicit meaning about the interpretations that a numeral in natural language can have by attributing to the participants certain epistemic stances towards the assumptions that are in the context. And it is perhaps this kind of context that provides the evidence for the acquisition that they need. So in cases like this, lexical knowledge would be less important than the ability to attribute some epistemic stance to the participants. I think this is what I've just said, but this needs to be explored in more detail. But, so that's it.
Well, I'm going to start. I will concentrate on some aspects discussed in Carmen's paper. Some of those things were discussed in her presentation, but probably not all of them. Anyways, this is more or less the order in which I will be explaining the issues in here. I will concentrate on the contextualist view, the way they see this, or they try to explain this issue of exact readings versus interval readings. According to Carsten and Atlas, the problem is the following: number terms as lexical elements do not encode conceptual content. The solution they propose is this: the use of a number term n directs to a conceptual zone around the concept of the cardinal n in the language of thought. Exactly n. Then, the number terms as concepts in the language of thought in their composition are exactly n or more than exactly, for example, 5, exactly n or less than exactly 5. These two will be the interval interpretations, and as well, there's another possibility, exactly n or more than exactly, well, in this case 5, exactly n or less than exactly 5, approximative interpretations. What are the arguments they provide to defend their claim? They say if the semantics of n were exactly n, then 1, 2, and 3 should be redundant. But they are not. Actually, if you look at the examples, you can miss at most 3 lectures. You should write at least 10,000 words. Should lend me exactly $100, all examples taken from Carmen's paper. And of course, they are not redundant. In comparison with 4, which is an example of true redundancy, for example, if you contrast between 4A and 4B, he gave me some beautiful tulips, and B, he gave me some flower tulips. Here we have a case, according to these authors, that is an example of true redundancy. The problem in here is that at most, at least, and exactly are not redundant. They can be emphatic if you want to, or they can be modifiers, but they are not redundant. So this argument does not hold. In terms of the empirical evidence, as Carmen suggested, there was a study that tried to test the naive view versus the contextualist view in terms of reaction times, and in terms of reaction times and in terms of selection of exact interpretation versus interval interpretations. In this study, in terms of reaction times, when both the exact reading, visible or not, and the interval reading were possible, reaction times should not be different according to the contextualist view. What happened in the study is that actually some subjects did indeed show interval readings, lower bounded or upper bounded readings, but the evidence is not conclusive in the sense that most of the subjects chose to select the exact reading. And the examples, the samples that we have with interval readings were so few that this obviously does not help us to support their claim. Another possibility, which is something that was not done with this specific study, but it will be another possibility to test the claim, is to conduct an eye tracking study. If you're familiar with this type of experimentation, the idea is that the eye trackers follows the subject's eyes and determines when the eyes stop and and view a specific object, or I don't know, an utterance, and it also determines the time they actually spend. If they are supposed to do a task, for example, select a specific answer, it also tells you how long it took them to select a specific answer. The question that was suggested by these results was, do subjects entertain the idea of an interval reading while deciding whether to choose or not an exact interpretation where both options are possible? And the answer is, we don't know. We can speculate, though, that this might be the case because in terms of time, reaction times, subjects took a lot longer to determine, in some cases, to choose the exact reading. And, well, I might probably show you, if I know I don't have it here, but anyways, later on I will show it to you, how this happened. But this will be another possibility to either discard or get evidence from the contextualist view, but we don't have this evidence yet. The next thing, the approximate interpretation. This, as a matter of fact, is an area where not many studies have been conducted. There are some studies within the optimality theory framework that have suggested how this could actually be explained. But I think that in terms of the approximative interpretation, the language itself provides the elements and the linguistic cues, and in here, in my personal opinion, there are no problems. We have in the language, for example, in the case of English, the directional suffix ish, for example, like in cases in which you don't want to be precise. So people do have that linguistic element to provide this vagueness. Round numbers, tens of thousands, dozens of thousands. For example, the Gardner's darling, you've seen it hundreds of times. Actually, the example that Carmen gave a few moments ago was more or less in the same line. We have also approximating adverbs about, around, some, roughly, that can give you the idea of approximate interpretation. So I don't think that in this specific case we can discuss anything in terms of the contextualist view. Coordinating tags, something, or so, for example, like cases at examples like 8 or 9. As for the interval interpretation, there is a possibility to derive these interpretations, these readings, if we mark the derivations explicitly with expressions such as at least, or at most, or at the most. You have the examples in 10, 11, and 12, okay? The problem, the puzzle, according to Mussolino, is that children are reluctant to deviate from punctual interpretations, especially when interval interpretations are explicitly conveyed. Well, the answer is very simple. They do not know the term. Okay, actually, they might probably know the superlative, but they do not know the idiom, because at least and at the most are idioms. Since they do not know, and this is my personal interpretation, since they do not know the meaning of the idiom, they simply ignore it and choose the default interpretation, which will be the exact interpretation. The meaning of the superlative does not equal the interpretation of an interval interpretation. Okay, so this is something that we have to consider. Now, the last part, modal context and ignorance assumption. The problem is if children are reluctant to deviate from punctual interpretations, when interval interpretations are explicitly conveyed, but they can give non-exact readings when they are conveyed implicitly, the question, as Carmen said before, what sort of linguistic evidence will make this interpretation or these interpretations possible? Okay, we have, on the one hand, the numerically quantifiable noun phrases. We have theory of mind in the subjects that were tested by Mussolini, and we have explicit models. As for the verb numerals, because when they do entertain that interval reading, when they have a verb numeral, the Carmen's idea is that the cyclic interpretation is epistemically moralized. And in the case of lower and upper bounded interpretations, children must recover these readings extra-linguistically. They are pragmatically understood and not linguistically decoded. Children are probably ascribing to speakers ignorance about certain states of affairs. This is a possible explanation. I would like to, I want to believe, I think there's another possibility, more linguistic. The idea is discussed within the generative paradigm and syntax, and it's the distinction between interpretable features and uninterpretable features. The idea of these features is that the lexical terms do have certain features that are acquired when those content words are acquired. And in terms of acquisition, different scholars have claimed that children first recognize interpretable features and then uninterpretable ones. That is, the first ones are more accessible and they are relevant for the semantic component. And the others are relevant for the well-formance of utterances, of sentences, but not relevant for the semantic component. Okay? Do we have evidence that this is the case? Actually, we do. Simply and et al. In other studies provides evidence from Greek showing that focus, negation, and modality, all involving interpretable features, emerged earlier than tense, smooth, and agreement, which involve uninterpretable features. If this is the case, my speculation is that when children acquired numbers, at first they systematically derive an exact reading. Later on, because this happens later, when they acquire the projection of modality, focus, and negation, they can acquire those interpretable features. They can, with that evidence, go back and with their numerals can entertain the idea of interval readings. That will be a nice solution from a linguistic point of view. Okay. And well, this is the idea. And well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm going to ask. Thank you. Yeah, well, I just want to comment on a couple of things you said and ask you a few questions. I don't think that Carsten and Atlas's view is that number terms do not encode conceptual features. You have a concept that is an under-specified concept, but it's a concept nonetheless. What might imply that there are no conceptual features encoded in a number term, in a linguistic number term, is the view of Burton, Roberts, and Michael, because then if concepts are just pointers to certain conceptual areas in thought, then that would mean that there's no content in there. There's just like an indication or go to this conceptual area, and that would indeed mean that there's no conceptual content. And I don't know if I want to go that far, because that has consequences over a general view of word meaning, which I'm not sure I want to accept. That would lead you, for example, to accepting that all words are mere pointers to conceptual areas in thought, and then there wouldn't be any conceptual content in words themselves. They would just be pointers. That I'm not sure what I think of that. But that was one thing. But the other thing is, I think what you're saying, I agree with what you're saying. I think that what we have to know, and especially with modal contexts, are you're going to have, when you have modals, explicit modals that modify a number term, there are all sorts of things going on. You're going to have compositional issues, but you're going to have also issues of modal concord that we haven't explored in detail linguistically yet. So there's going to be all sorts of things going on. I was wondering whether what you're suggesting, and I think you're right, you can have modality encoded in two different ways. You can have modal verb, which would be conceptual, I think, and if it is conceptual, then it would be an interpretable feature. Is that yeah? And then you would have morphology.
The features associated with modality have to do with possibility, necessity, volition, etc.
But it would be morphological. So that would predict that it would be more difficult, or it would take longer for a child to understand things. I'm thinking in Spanish now, because that's where you have, for instance, mood, when something like cuando tengas 4 años, and then that non-interpretable feature in tengas, in the subjunctive mood, that would only enable interval interpretation, like when you're 4 or older, once you've acquired this, the features of modality which are non-interpretable. But what would happen, or what would be the contrast if you had a number term modified by a modal which is conceptual, like can, may, must, which is not morphologically, is not uninterpretable. There are interpretable features of modality as well, aren't they? Or am I?
Yes, the difference is that in the case of a Spanish mood, it's a functional category, and since it's a functional category, it takes longer for children to acquire. And what we have to test is whether in Spanish there's a delay in terms of in interval readings or not, in comparison to English-speaking children.
Yes, but the prediction would be that when you, in comparison with English-speaking children first, but then within Spanish-speaking children, the prediction would be that when you have modal auxiliary, or that would enable upper bounded readings or lower bounded readings sooner than when you have them embedded on a subjunctive.
Yes, absolutely.
But that's
Actually, there's a discussion in what is called heritage languages. I don't know if you have heard about that. In the case of Spanish, immigrants in the United States, second or third generation subjects, who do not, whose mother tongue is Spanish, but who entered the country very early, and there was an asymmetry in terms of acquisition of Spanish. It was what is called, this is called the phenomenon of language interrupted, because they did not end acquiring the mother tongue and started acquiring a second language. There are studies in terms of the subjunctive that say that, well, there are two hypotheses. One that claims that this is they can interpret the subjunctive mood. They can interpret it, but they cannot produce it. And this is well attested. And there's another hypothesis that says that actually what happens there is that there's an incomplete acquisition, and that the projection, the functional projection of mood, was not developed, and therefore what you can see as apparent understanding is not the case. They cannot understand because they cannot compute that functional category. Mm-hmm. But that's a debate, let's say. And Spanish as a heritage language in the United States.
Yeah, well, I think I agree with you that the evidence indeed does point to some hierarchy in interpretations, and the exact interpretation is always there. And that should say something about the contextualist view of Karsten and Atlas, because if they are right, you would have variables that can be filled with any of three values, and no interpretation should be preferred over another one in neutral contexts. And that is just not happening. I think in that you're right.
Yeah.
So, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Question?
Me? Yeah, I have very little to say about the children case. It is very difficult, you're right. It's pretty costly. But I was, but in the data from the first part, actually, I thought it gave us good reasons to think that the semantics would be at least n. And I think there are two parts where this seems to suggest itself. Or maybe I'm wrong, but I want you to tell me what you think. The first one is when you presented data from GERTS 2007 with somebody, another author.
No,
I
no,
remember.
no.
Can you put them up? Maybe it's no longer possible. Because when I saw that, I was really appalled, saddened. Yeah, I thought the world was horrible. That was right, because it presented an asymmetry between at least n and at most n, right? Because yeah,
He's not talking about numerals. He's just trying to contrast the semantics of superlatives and comparatives, and saying that they're not equivalent.
okay, then maybe it is the way you phrase it.
Maybe.
So you understand what I see it. So maybe I want to say, what I would like to say is like, when you use number terms, you mean at least.
This is what you want to say.
Yeah, that you, Carmen,
No,
when you are presenting
no,
this.
no,
Yes.
no. I think that, no, I think that when you use a number term, you are telling the hearer, go to this conceptual area and choose which of all the concepts that contain exactly n in their composition the speaker is referring to.
Oh, yeah, you're trying to be a context. You're defending a contextual position.
But a different one.
No,
I don't want variables, no.
No, yeah, without variable. Yeah, no,
No.
I understood that. Yeah, because it's
No.
more of a relevantist.
I just want meaning modulation.
Yes, but that's what you explicitly defend. But I don't think that is the way you actually use the terms.
All right.
Well, no, that's not true, because even if you use it meaning at least, you can say that, well, that is because I made the accommodation, and that is why I ended up with that.
Yes,
Because
yes.
I first went to the exact n, and then. Okay, so here is my my argument of why this doesn't seem to support your use of n.
Okay.
Because
You
if
still
this was
want
true,
GERTS?
yes, that's my evidence. If I remember it right. If I don't remember right, then I'm going to make just a fool of myself.
Yeah.
It's because if that was right, then there would be an asymmetry between at least and at most, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you just first focus on it. You say it has to be one of these three, and then you accommodate. Okay, yeah, no, there's the next one where you say it's possible, then it is possible.
That's.
The next one, there.
All right. Yeah.
Okay. At least three, you say that means that it's necessary that there is a bomb, and three and went up, and it's possible that
More than three.
and
Went up.
the number of x is larger than
Than
three, and here is the number of. Okay. At least three means that it's necessary that there were three. There you mean that it's necessary that there were at least three.
This is
And this is
epistemic
GERTS.
modality, right?
I'm sorry?
This is epistemic modality?
Yeah. So whenever you put the numeral three, you mean at least three. That's what I'm saying. Maybe you didn't do it consciously, but that is how you're using it. But I guess if we don't think,
No,
if you,
hang on.
if we thought that it was exactly, then that's false.
No, hang on. I don't know if I'm understanding you. These here are just ways of capturing the content of an interpretation,
So
but
what-
not the semantics of N.
No, yeah, exactly. Doesn't matter. I'm not asking about what you're trying to model here, but about how am I going to interpret your language in this
Yeah.
slide.
Okay,
And you use the numeral 3, and you say 3 of X. That
Yes.
means at least 3 of X.
no, I'm,
Yes, because if it's necessary that there has to be, if at least 3 entails that it's necessary that there are 3, it doesn't entail that it's necessary that there are exactly 3. It
no,
has to entail that it's necessary
And-
that there's 3.
and it is
And it's
possible.
Yeah, okay. So then the number terms you use here mean at least 3.
Ah,
I don't see why.
I don't either, thank you very much. I see what you mean, that, no, I think that when I write 3 here, I just mean the cardinality, the exact cardinality of the concept. And the concept should be exact, the concept itself.
Okay, then what is the scope of the X there? Just anything. So there are at least, there is an X that is a bomb, and there are
Yes,
3,
there is a set of 3 elements
and it
that are
exists.
bombs and that went off. And it is possible that there is another set of bombs whose cardinality is larger than 3, and that also went off. And that the whole thing should be at least 3 bombs went off.
I mean, what's weird is that you need an epistemically possible world where there's like one set of 3 bombs that go off and then another set, or more than 3 go off. Is that,
And
So
then
that's-
this one should be contained
so every
in that one.
epistemically
No.
possible world is one where there's a 3-numbered set.
Mhm.
And then there's another epistemically possible world where there's a 4 or 5-numbered set or whatever.
Yeah.
So that world also has to be a world where there's a 3-numbered set for a bomb goes off. So like the epistemically possible worlds where more than 3 bombs goes off, 3 bombs go off, are also worlds which contain.
Yeah, I see what you mean, okay. Okay, I have to.
Are you committed to the epistemic reading? Because there is another way of expressing at least 3 in logic vocabulary, without reality. And where you can say, there is X, Y, and Z, X, Y, and Z are bombs, and they explode, they went off, that's it. And that's true in any model that has at least 3 objects.
Well, I did want the epistemic thing in
Oh,
the,
you did one,
Yes.
okay.
What?
So,
I thought it was enlightening, but
That's the good.
no, because I started, I tell you why, perhaps I should rethink this. In principle, yes, I wanted the epistemic element in the characterization of the superlative, because I started by looking at the contrast. How do you know that, I mean, what would be the difference in treating the interval interpretations, not in terms of superlatives, but in terms of comparatives? And I had no way of distinguishing between those two. I said, well, when we're saying at least 3, are we saying more than 2? Or are we saying at least 3? Is there any difference? Are they equivalent? And then I came across this characterization of superlatives where you have modality in their lexical entries. And I thought it helped to decide whether you were, you had any sort of epistemic thing involved in interval interpretations, and I wanted to account for the way children could foresee that when it was not in language, and I thought, oh, they are considering the epistemic stance of the speaker. And that's why I was originally committed to the epistemic part of it.
Yeah.
Thanks, I'm gonna follow- Just a quick follow-up, I mean, on the B truth condition, I guess what's puzzling to me is like, if it's just evident that I have 2 pens, isn't it true that I have at least 2 pens? But then there's no epistemic possibility. I mean, it's not an open possibility for any of us that I have more than 2, right? But then the B reading would predict that the sentence should be false, because there's no epistemic possibility. Like, it's just obvious. Like, all the epistemic possibilities are ones where I have 2 pens. You know, here they are.
Or you
So
have
is it true that? So it has at least 2 pens. Yes, I would have thought, but then that means B is wrong, right? Or the modality isn't epistemic, some other thing, but then I don't know what. Right? If we
I still don't see that point because you.
I guess another way to put it is, shouldn't exactly 3 entail at least 3?
Which would mean that at least is more basic than exactly.
Well, just that, like, the truth condition for exactly 3 definitely doesn't entail something
At
about there
least.
being an epistemic possibility. Yeah.
Okay.
So I think that, in other words, the point is this: I think that the conjunct there, it's too strong.
Yeah, I see.
Anyway.
Yeah.
But I guess that's
Thank
an
you.
objection to Gertz. No, if this is there.
No, but yeah, I see the point. Thank you.
Sorry.
So this is just a question about the relationship between your view and the other sort of contextualist view that you sketched. So I can kind of see what kind of truth conditions that view would deliver for sentences involving number words. But I wonder how your view interacts with giving truth conditions for these sentences, as opposed to what you're instructing the hearer to do.
I'm not sure I'm understanding.
So you said on your view, the number 7 instructs the audience to find some concept in the ballpark of exactly 7. I wonder what truth conditions for sentences involving the word 7 that would deliver, if any, or is that just not part of the project?
Well, that's not part of the project, but it's something we should think of. Yeah.
So you want to say something?
Okay, yeah, sure. I have another question. So, well, this is just a general thought. I mean, a lot of this stuff, so there's this idea that seems to be gaining currency that defended by people like Kierkegaard and Fox, that their language is full of these covert exhaustivity operators. And I was just wondering how that idea might interact with, so there's this, your proposals are like some of this phenomena, you know, like take a simple case with a numeral under a modal, like Billy can have 2 cookies. Seems like the natural reading might be paraphrased as Billy can have only 2 cookies, which seems to mean basically the same as at most 2 cookies. And I wonder how much of what we're seeing in these data, I guess, I mean, it's not really a very specific question, but I'm wondering, like, if you've thought about that idea and how it interacts with the semantics of these terms. Like, if there's this possibility that the word only, like, appears covertly, or, you know, a covert counterpart of only can appear in all of these syntactic positions, then, according to these theorists, like, most sentences are kind of massively ambiguous and all these different, but it mostly has to do with just only. Nothing specifically about, say, numbers, or at least at most.
Yeah, I know that Kierkegaard's idea of only being everywhere hidden.
Yeah.
No, I mean, they want to put everything in the grammar, I think,
Right.
or as most as you can in the grammar, and I think I'm running in a different direction, not the opposite direction. It's not that I want everything to come from context, but I think that's somewhere in between, like, and I don't like covert hidden variables in general as an explanation, because I think, first, I think it overgenerates. Second, I think if you can account for everything just by assuming that there is a hidden variable, a covert variable there, and but I think that the idea would be that there is an only. You can have 2 cookies. There is a hidden only in there. That
Any other question? Mike.
I have a question along, I guess, in the same direction as Jeff's question. So when you said that 7, for example, conventionally expresses something in the ballpark of exactly 7, the first thought that comes to mind is that sounds like very permissive, right? So I was wondering.
3 million
for
could be in
example,
there, but
you cannot include there things like either exactly 7 or exactly 1,455, something like that. That's in the ballpark of exactly 7. That cannot be part of it.
No.
Right, of the conventional expressed meaning of that. So I was wondering if you have some implicit restriction in mind, right? Something, for example, 7 modified by a certain set of specified in some particular way, modifiers, right? Something like that.
Well, first, the answer is in two parts. The first part is, of course, I noticed that if you say that and it points to a neighborhood around exactly 7, then that is everything. That includes millions, trillions. If you accept that that those concepts have exactly 7 in their composition, but normally you wouldn't say that 1 million has exactly 7 as a concept in its composition, would you?
No, but the disjunctive concept, for example, of being either exactly 7 or exactly 1 million, does have exactly 7 as part of its composition, as a concept. But that can be something conventionally expressed by 7.
No.
I think.
No. Well, first I'm thinking that you have pragmatic principles that constrain.
Okay.
So if you use 7, you are communicated that 7 is relevant for the concept you are going to build. And if you go to 3 million, then 7 is not relevant for that concept. And in that sense, it wouldn't be a part of the 7 wouldn't be part of its composition, I think. So, but also because of pragmatic principles, not 3 million, but why 10 in some cases and why 8 in other cases. And I think I do think that is pragmatically determined. And there is a pragmatic reason why you chose 7 and not 8. And I think the speaker knows that. So I think it's an interaction.
There are some pragmatic principles that actually restrict what is conventional.
Yeah,
expressed.
yeah, there should be. Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I didn't finish. I'm sorry. I'm gonna try and see that this time I can make.
We just keep this slide.
Yes, I'm sorry. It is because, I mean,
I'd never do it again.
if the one on top meant okay, no, it's not important.
I know.
Because if the one on top meant exactly 3, I mean, the one underneath implies the one on top.
Yes.
Because it's part of it, and of course, at least 3 does not imply exactly 3. At least you don't want that, right?
Yeah.
So that's what I was trying to see what 3
No,
meant there,
but
so that I could but
I mean, it's all confused maybe, but the idea was that in here you do have you do have exactly 3 here.
yeah, no, now we understand that, but then you don't have it on the top.
No.
Exactly.
No.
So that was
Yeah.
And just
Keep going.
no, just no. Maybe I can tell you.
No, tell me.
No, because I like symmetry and I don't like these characterizations that are so asymmetric. And just
Okay, no, that's
from,
fine.
but I have that symmetric. I can give it to you later.
Okay.
That's pretty asymmetric.
All right.
Okay, but then, and since you are presenting this in the context of models, I thought you were going to talk more about models and about whether you can say something about this in the context of more normal.
That would have been
accounts
ideal.
Of modality. And it's got to do with why I think you wanted some kind of representative modality. And that is because it must and can, you're thinking them as model operators, as a kind of a box and a kind of a extension. Then you want to know what does the number mean so that it is true in every epistemic possibility where something must be, and it is true at least in one possible world that it can be.
Yeah.
And you get that by the number you mean at least, because you must have, you must bring 3 people, but that is true if in every okay. Since this is a deontic modality, so that is, you get that if in every possible world where you actually fulfill this obligation, you have at least 1 or no, at least 3 or at least 4, at least 5, at least. At least 4 less, at least. You must, yeah. And then if you can bring 3, it's for any possibility where you can have at least 1, at least 2, at least and at least 3. But if your possibilities are at least 1, at least 2, and at least 3, then that means that there's at least one possible word in which you have at least 3. And this is not going to work neither for exactly 3 nor for at most 3. So that's also another reason why maybe you would want. If you, I know you don't like the idea that there's a semantic content and everything like that, but at least it would give you a nice interaction with.
No, I need a
operators.
semantic content.
Ah, you didn't? Oh.
Yeah, but I mean, it wouldn't be conceptual. It would be more procedural.
Ah, okay, yeah.
So there is a semantic to the number term, but it's just something that guides you through the conceptual, guides your search through a certain conceptual area.
Okay, and
But I'm not saying there's no semantics
okay.
to a number term, no.
No, but you haven't still told us which one it would be, whether it would be exactly or at least or at most.
It would be close to exactly, because it would direct you to all the concepts that have exactly n in their composition in a relevant way.
Yeah,
But it is
since we don't know
more of a
what is the
procedure.
composition of this term, we don't know that actually
No.
the 3 of them had at least as a as a
No,
complement.
no.
Thank
So thank you.
I will not be the
I was thinking of just remark that normally we will infer from exactly 3 to at least 3. That's the normal thing. If I have at least 2 pens, then if I have exactly 2 pens, then I have at least 2. That's normal. And normally we don't care whether the possibility is open to be more than that. But I'm thinking of a case in baseball. If you're a pitcher and you throw 3 balls, you can still strike out the guy. If you throw 4 balls, you can give him out a base.
Yeah.
So the umpire might say, oh, I got distracted. I'm not really sure. How many balls do you throw? Exactly 3. Oh, you mean at least 3? It's implied that you throw at least 3. No. I didn't throw at least 3, I throw exactly 3. And what you're trying to do is close that possibility, the second contact. So at least 3, I think is ambiguous. And in many cases, it will be implied by at least 3. But in some important cases, we don't know how many bombs. So we want to make explicit that there is this possibility that more explode. So when we're talking about what is the conceptual zone that these phrases take us to, you have to say, you have all these ambiguities within the zone. And sometimes it's going to be an epistemic alternative to be considered, and you want it to be considered. It's important that maybe more exploded, and sometimes it's very important that and no more. In which case it's a kind of at least that we cancel the epistemic possibility that you want in the second contract. So I think that we can accommodate these different intuitions because we're using the phrases in different ways. And your analysis is good for one of them, which I think is a very important one. But it doesn't exhaust all the ways in which we use the phrase at least.
No.
Modality.
I have, in a way, a related question, because it's the view you like to favor, that the proposition 3 bombs went off is compatible with these 3 different readings. So it's the same statement with 3 different readings, or we have 3 different statements altogether. So that, because for example, in the examples you gave with friends, bring your friends to the party. It seems to me that although you're using the same sequence of words, you actually mean very different things.
Yeah.
Right? So, and maybe, and of course, that's highlighted exactly by the context, each of the contexts that we provide. So similarly here, you want to say, well, in fact, maybe these are not 3 different readings of 3 bombs went off, but in effect, the statement is just indeterminate, right? And you have entirely different propositions.
That's the view I want to.
Okay.
Yes, it's somehow it is underdetermined, and it can be used to express the three propositions. And others, you could have approximately as well.
Right. Okay, good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so
So I was wondering about this, that's a question Axel brought up. Just made me wonder about, so it seems like the at most readings of numerals is preferred when you have a down-dip permissibility modal.
No, that's too much. We don't know that. It's
Well,
only
I
that
am
when
just
you.
reporting from my own.
Oh, right.
I reveal that. In fact, well, I mean, like the example we had earlier, like that we can have two cookies, right? Don't we? I mean, not that this is the only reading. I wouldn't claim that, but isn't there some gravitational pull towards the Billy can have at most, right? And then if you say Billy must eat 2 vegetables before dessert.
At least.
You mean at least, right? Okay, so that's interesting. So why is that? So why is it that under the permissibility modal, we tend to move towards the at most, and then under the necessity modal, well,
I mean, that is what needs to be explained, I think.
yeah, oh, okay. I wasn't sure if we had an explanation.
No, I mean, so far, the only thing I noticed is that in general, when you have interval interpretations,
Yeah.
it's when you have modal contexts. But why one leads to one interpretation and the other to the other, I'm not even sure that that is always the case. But you're right that we tend to, I mean, prototypical examples one thinks of, it's always like that. If you get permission, then it means at most. If you need obligation, then it means at least. And one would need to see what happens with the epistemic models as well and see if that is a pattern. I think there is evidence that that might not be a pattern, but it feels like a tendency.
Oh, okay.
But then you,
I mean, I totally agree that you can get counterexamples, but it also just feels like a pretty strong tendency, which
yes,
would be enough to have something to explain.
Yes.
But,
yes.
yeah, okay.
I just have a small, I don't know, it's kind of a question, but I don't have it yet because I was thinking about Mario's question and how is it that when you say 7, it's not like, it's something in the neighborhood of 7 and it's like pragmatically determining that it's not 1 million. I'm not so sure about it. I mean, I want to believe it's like that. But I was thinking about this example. It's something that happens quite often. It's like almost every week. I asked Melissa, can you borrow me some money? And it's like, how much do you need? And I'm always like, 20 pesos or 10 pesos, and she gives me like 50 or 100 or something like that. And there it seems like clearly it's, I think she's understanding what I'm asking her, but it seems like 100 is also in the neighborhood of 10 pesos. I mean, because I don't think she's getting it wrong. She's neither getting it wrong, but it doesn't seem to me odd that she gives me 100 pesos when I'm actually asking her for just 10. And it seems like it's happening just what Mario was worried about, that when you talk about a certain number, 100 or 200 can be in the neighborhood of 10. And it seems like, well, it's still pragmatically correct, or I don't know.
To say I need 1 peso and really you need 1 million pesos. Yeah. I mean, yes, as I was saying, if you leave it at that and you think that it's just going to be a semantic characterization of what the word can be used to do in the language, then you would have that. It depends on the radio of the neighborhood. Everything is in the neighborhood of everything else. If you don't, I think it's going to be much more difficult than that, but you need something to fit pragmatic processes with. And this is a vague characterization as it is. I'm not saying it is like that. I shouldn't have said it. You should just have said it. It looks as if the semantics is going to be close to exactly, and leave it at that. But I have this worry that it seems that words are really, it's a more general worry, not only about number terms, that words very much, they seem to be pointers at conceptual zones in general. And I'm not sure if that is what you need. Now, for number terms, I think you can have a very underspecified semantic content with a right account of the pragmatic processes and also the linguistic effects, the compositional effects. And if you have that, which we don't have now, if you have that, then it would explode like that, and it would take you to a huge neighborhood. You shouldn't do that. But yes, I saw the point immediately.
So.
Thank you.